everybody. Good afternoon or good morning up there in Brussels. So my name is Jerome. I'm working as international expert in energy and climate change based here in Hanoi for the Belgian Technical Cooperation. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Green Growth Strategy Facility. So it's a BTC project here we have with the government of Vietnam. So what I want to do in about 30-40 minutes, and first is to thank you for being here. What I want to do is to first start with a little bit of recap about the stakes we are discussing, the environmental stakes around us, just to make sure that we have together a common view on the global stakes. Then we will dig a little bit more in depth into the green growth concept, and then in the Green Growth Strategy Facility we have here in Vietnam before we conclude together. So what I suggest is that I go through those 4 points, and after each point we may have a few 1 minute or a few seconds for questions if you guys have questions at that time. Okay, but let's start with the stakes, and we'll take a look at the global stakes, and then a little bit more focus on Vietnam. So pretty recently in the scientific literature, the concept of planet boundaries was really at the front stage. So the planet, you may be aware of the 2 degrees limitation for the global warming. There are some similar boundaries for other types of environmental stakes, and some of them are actually already exceeded, like in biodiversity or in biochemical flows. There are already a few planetary boundaries that are exceeded. And climate change, with extreme consequences for the humanity, may be the next one. Of course, there are relationships between the different dimensions, and of course, all these different dimensions have an impact on the human life. But the other way around is also true. The human life has an impact on those boundaries, as it was demonstrated by the different IPCC reports in the case of climate change. So this notion of planet boundaries is pretty much important today. If we look at the ecological footprint, it means the surface of biocapacity you need to answer the living standards. We see that developed countries are living at a level that is beyond the biocapacity that is available. So it's not sustainable. So you know that image, if everybody was living as, let's say, the Belgian population, we would need something like more than 4 planets to answer that living tax and the consumption of resources. And the carbon emissions are only one dimension of that. This is for the status today. If we look at the history, we see also that human development is correlated to energy consumption and to carbon emissions. So when we say human development here on the graph, it is measured with the Human Development Index. So it's the average of the gross national revenue per capita, the life expectancy, and the duration of the studies, so the education. So it's a UNDP Human Development Composite Indicator. And we see on this graph that for our developed country, on the bottom left of the graph, if you increase a little bit the energy or the carbon emissions, you have a steep increase of the HDI index. But after a certain level, around 0.75 or something like that, this relation is not that true. We have kind of saturation. So countries tend to increase their consumption of energy per capita or their emissions, but that doesn't really bring steep HDI improvement. So the positive message here could be that for developed countries, the human development is still possible and doesn't require energy additional energy consumption. So that's for the historical relationship. The problem is that if we look at the recently emerged countries, we see that nobody has leapfrogged that carbon-intensive stage in the human development. And of course, all those planet boundaries, all those new scientific materials, and confirmation of the risk of the current human development paradigms are challenging a little bit the usual way of conceiving sustainable development. Just an example here, where in the past we used to describe sustainable development as a kind of compromise between three dimensions: society, environment, and the economy. But maybe today we agree that this conception is not true anymore, because this notion of planet boundaries is really taking importance, and maybe we have to reorganize a little bit the way we see it. So scientific concerns, but there are also global policy responses or attempts to answer that. Of course, the Sustainable Development Goals is one of the proposed answers by the international community. The Paris Agreement at the recent COP21 is, of course, a very visible part of those efforts at international level to answer the challenges. And the concept of the green growth, as we will see, was also introduced to kind of contribute to the answer. That's for the global level. And we should never forget that behind that, there's a notion of, at least for the climate change, there is a notion of climate justice, or different questions related to climate justice, because there is an intra-generation problem. So some countries bear more responsibility historically than other countries. If we look at the historical carbon emissions, there is also a question of responsibility with regards to the upcoming generations. And there is a very tricky question related to the balance between right to development and right to emit greenhouse gas emissions, especially for emerging countries. This is at the heart of the negotiations and the agreements today. International climate finance is supposed to be one of the answers to those climate justice questions. So international climate finance, what do we mean with that? We mean all the money that is needed to set up the investment for mitigating climate change, and also to face the consequences of the climate change, or even to repair the damages to come in the future, or already almost observed today. Let's just stress that there is a huge need for investments. According to the International Energy Agency, there is about $1 trillion per year that are needed up to 2050 only for the energy sector, for mitigating, for keeping the 2 degrees limit. The Green Climate Fund is an initiative under the UNFCCC, sorry. So a kind of new tool to encourage and to officialize the support from developed countries to developing countries to both mitigate their emissions and to face the consequences of climate change. So far, about $10 billion, a little bit more, are pledged, and so the need is still very high behind. That's for the global stage. So what you have to remember here is that there are a certain number of notions that add on the climate change only stage. So there are other dimensions that could a little bit make the problem more complex, that sometimes it is summarized in the, let's say, in the media. So what is the situation for Vietnam? Vietnam, in terms of HDI, is at the medium development. It's also a middle income country for a few years now. If you compare it to the other countries here in the Southeast Asia region, It's a little bit in the middle, but it's approaching the threshold, the saturation threshold we have discussed a few slides ago. Vietnam has also witnessed a very steep economic growth over the last 20 years, of around 6 to 7% GDP increase for the last 20 years. And there is still an important, a significant increase of the GDP expected for the coming years. But in terms of ecological footprint, if you look at the graph here on the left, let's say since the early 90s, the consumption of biocapacity is also exceeding the available capacity in the country. So in the very latest report from the Global Footprint Network, Vietnam was underlined on one hand as one of the Asian countries with a rapid economic expansion, increasing its ecological footprint. But Vietnam was also, together with Cambodia, recognized as one of the countries having set up a lot of, developed a lot of efforts to recover the biocapacity. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions, according to business as usual, so today's trend, the total emissions of the country are expected to double by 2020 and to almost triple by 2030. This is also true for the emissions per capita. And if you look at the graph, it means that by 2030, Vietnam will have emissions per capita that are comparable to the emissions per capita of Western countries in 2012. In terms of absolute emissions, that means, for instance, that Vietnam will have more emissions of greenhouse gases than France by 2020 already. In its INDC, so the intended nationally determined contribution, so the contribution proposed by Vietnam at the latest COP21 in Paris, Vietnam suggested to reduce its emissions by 8% compared to the business as usual by 2030, and even more if there is international technical and financial support. Now, it's not only a question of ecological footprint and carbon emissions. There are also raising concerns regarding the health costs of air pollution. Those figures are taken from an already old report from the OECD, but showing that in 2010 there were about 30,000 deaths caused by air pollution. Air pollution here is to be taken in a very broad sense, not only the pollution from coal-fired power plants, but also from traffic and so on. And this has, of course, important costs for the economy and the government and the society in general here in Vietnam. Beyond that, there are many other sustainability challenges. Here, I just want to sum up a few facts for energy, health, and climate change. In terms of energy, Vietnam is consuming plus 10% of electricity per year. So this is a huge increase. This goes faster than the economy. You just double the electricity consumption every 6 or 7 years. In terms of intensity, so it means the amount of energy you consume to produce 1 unit of GDP, Vietnam has not the best performances compared to the neighbor countries. In the coming years, there will be also a question of security of supply and of dependency, because Vietnam will increase its share of imported primary energy. And of course, there is also the question of managing and governing the developing power supplies framework system. In terms of health, we discussed already about the air pollution, and there is a rising concern about the water pollution, especially these last days. We could see a lot of things in the media related to that. In terms of climate change, Vietnam is a highly vulnerable country with regards to natural disasters. It was ranked 7th most affected country for the natural disasters over the last decade in a recent report. We also know that in case of sea level rise, the Mekong Delta and the delta of the Red River will be seriously affected, which can have huge consequences for the national economy. And this last month also the risk of increased and worsened drought period was really a matter of concern. So Vietnam is both an emerging country and also facing challenges, and so green growth may be an answer to that. So at this stage, I would like to dig in a little bit more in the definition of green growth, maybe underline also a few specificities of Asian countries, and then also touch upon the risks of the green growth paradigm. So at this stage, I would like to ask you the question, is there any one of you who can propose me a definition of green growth? Or first, let's play with the voting stuff. Do you know what is green growth? Can you say just yes or no? Okay, so I see one yes. So either the others are not hearing me or they don't dare to say it, but let me go then further with the definition. So the most commonly accepted definition of green growth is the one from OECD, dating from 2011, and it's the following. Green growth means fostering economic growth and development. How, while ensuring that the natural assets continue to provide the resources and the environmental services on which our well-being relies. So there's the idea that we focus on economic growth by preserving the natural capital that is needed for the economic growth and the well-being more generally. And also we use that restoration of the natural capital as a way to contribute to economic growth. So behind the green growth brand, there are two core principles that you have to keep in mind. On one hand, there's the notion of boosting the green sectors. That's the historical definition of green growth. And on the other hand, there is the idea of decreasing the environmental impact of the economy, in particular, decreasing a little bit the share of the most damageable sectors. Of course, since 2011, some other variations of the concept have been proposed, like the green economy of UNEP or the inclusive green growth, and both of them taking a little bit more attention, paying a little bit more attention to social aspects. But the general idea behind is the same. Asian countries have very soon been leaders in that, or at least try to take a leadership position. The very first country to bet on boosting the green sector is, of course, China. And if you look today at Korea, for instance, they are clearly one of the leaders in, at least under the green growth umbrella. That's why some green growth institutions are based in Korea. In 2011, the academies of science of several Asian countries together wrote a kind of position paper on green growth, where they recognize that Asia has favorable factors, like a strong government, like a cultural tradition to preserve harmony with nature. Also, of course, they know they have huge potential for green consumer markets and a huge potential for developing renewable energy. That's one of the reasons why Asian countries are betting on that also. But so, having said that, not everybody is happy or supporting the green growth paradigm. There are many cautions against it, and I would like to summarize them a little bit. The very first thing is that a lot of scientists are challenging the idea that we can decouple economic growth from environmental impact at global level. Of course, some countries or regions of the world managed to do it over the last years, but most of the time it is by displacing a little bit the environmental impact by changing the nature of the GDP. One of the reasons why it is not easy to decouple the economy from environmental impact is the rebound effect. So if you increase the efficiency of an object, most of the time people will buy it more or will use their saved money to consume something else. There are also limitations of the technology in general, the technology efficiency. You cannot bet on a constant improvement of the efficiency of all technologies. Some technologies are reaching a saturation level. There are limitations in the mechanism we set up in place, the market mechanism we set up in place to try to cope, to boost the sectors and to reduce the impact on the natural capital. And some researchers also have demonstrated how the increase of the economy can structurally trap the countries into carbon-intensive stages. That's one group of classical remarks. The way you design green growth strategies is also very often based on cost-benefits models, which have limitations also. So cost-benefits, you look at how much you have to pay for developing an action and how much you gain from that. But what do you put in your price? What kind of externalities, environmental impact do you put in the cost-benefit analysis? And what's the methodology behind? Sometimes it's good to put the externalities, but sometimes the methodology behind weakens a little bit the conclusions you can draw from that. But more generally, the problem of green growth is that it may omit a certain number of important sustainability aspects. If you remember the planet boundary discussion at the beginning of this webinar, some of those planet boundaries may be totally forgotten in a green growth strategy. And also the question of the social impact or the interconnections between different dimensions may be underestimated in a green growth paradigm. These are a few risks from the literature and from many sources. And of course, the more the green growth paradigm is dominant in a country, the more those risks have to be taken into account, the more they have a probability to occur. So that's why, so if I simplify the thing, if in one country you have only the green growth paradigm or a policy, then you may have problems. The solutions, of course, are either to extend a little bit the green growth policy, like most Asian countries are doing. Some other habits, of course, is to put other policies in parallel to build up a few safeguards, or maybe also to develop policies sequentially. That means, okay, let's do first green growth, and then we try to move to something a little bit more fundamental. Or you can come up with a totally different development paradigm, like some other countries have tried to do.